Okay, well, I'll start with the person closest to me, John Carlson. Do you want to give them a job description? And
I'm the Senior Marketing Manager with Ricoh Imaging, responsible for all sorts of marketing activities, from retail to product, and been with Ricoh Imaging in various form factors with Pentax for coming up on 19 years.
So let's just go into the relationship between Ricoh and Pentax now, just because this is going to get confusing.
Yeah. So Ricoh purchased Pentax 2 years ago in October, and it's really great for the brand and the company because Ricoh brings a tremendous amount of research and development and imaging experience. So we're really excited about it, but just to assure everybody that the Pentax brand is going to continue in all of our DSLRs and our lenses and our sport optics, and Pentax will be around for a very long time.
Excellent.
Great, thank you.
And then next to John, we have Simon, who's my boss and everyone at DPreview's boss. He's the editor-in-chief of DPR.
Seems like a pretty cool boss to me.
Yeah, I try. I try. I've been there since 2004, so I've done pretty much every bit of disciplining I could ever do. In fact, long before most of these people arrived.
And then next to Simon, we have Jay Kelbley from Samsung.
And I'm the Senior Marketing Manager from Samsung, responsible for the Samsung NX line in the US.
All ready to introduce Mark?
I think we are. There he is. We've got Mark right here.
Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mark Weir. Happy to be joining this this famous panel here. I'm the Senior Technology Manager for Sony Digital Imaging. Glad to be here.
All right, thank you. Okay.
So our panel of experts here, we are going to talk again about some technology trends that you guys have been seeing. I'm going to start with the enthusiast video. We haven't really focused a lot of our conversation yet today on video. So how is the demand that you guys are seeing out there in the market? How is that affecting what you are working on for the smaller, or just for camera design?
So I'm actually going to address that question to Mark initially.
Okay, great.
Mark, how is video affecting camera design, from your point of view?
Well, thanks, Barney. It's affecting it in a variety of ways. Obviously, the discovery, if you will, of large sensor video with interchangeable lenses that's been going on for a good 2 years now, 3 years, has led for camera development to improve in the area of video capture. This is easier said than done because sensor technology, processor technology, lenses, focusing, etc., between cameras and video cameras has been different for years. And it's been sort of a difficult process to move cameras forward to the point where they can capture video as easily as a camcorder. We've done that over the last 2 or 3 years by taking a very different approach than, say, a conventional moving mirror SLR would have with both our mirrorless cameras as well as our SLT cameras. So as we go forward, there's certainly plenty of demand. For years, people have been looking for the perfect combination of the camera that could capture both still and video with high quality. It's easier said than done, but I think that you can see that the industry is converging in that direction.
And how does that affect Samsung, Jay?
Well, you're seeing a shift, I think, with all manufacturers away from pure video camera platforms as that market contracts rapidly. From a design standpoint in cameras, you're seeing a lot of changes in lenses in particular. The old school DC motors that were used in lenses, when you use them for video, give you that awesome grinding noise. So you see shifts in lenses like this one to voice coil actuators that are quiet, specifically for use in video. You're seeing additions of things like infrastructure for digital boom mics, additional communications to the hot shoe to support those boom mics, power, microphone, headphone ports is standard operation for checking levels on all these products.
So John, the K3, the DSLR was announced this year. That's the first Pentax/Ricoh DSLR which has had a mic jack.
Yes.
So video is obviously factoring into your calculations there as well.
And it's very important because I think customers are seeing what they can do with a DSLR that they couldn't do with a camcorder. You know, affect depth of field and really get very creative in a smaller space than a traditional or a professional video camera that could give you those effects. So creatively, I think people are really expanding on what they can do.
Interesting. Something I've been thinking a lot about recently has come up on DP Review as well, is the 4K video is coming at some point. It's going to come in the consumer space, and there are some question marks there over whether that will have an impact on still photography as well. And what do you think, Jay?
Can I just interject and say, can you talk a little bit about what 4K video
Sure,
is for people who may not be, I see nodding heads, as familiar with the technology?
I'll let Jay do the definition, because I think you've got a better head for the numbers than me.
I think, well, the easiest way to describe it is basically 4 times the resolution of full HD. So you've got 4,000 lines across the top axis. So 4 times the resolution of what you've got today. It's essentially the same resolution to what's used in the digital projection system in a movie theater today.
Really?
It's like a 6 to 8 megapixel resolution in still terms.
Pretty amazing. That from a impact on the market standpoint, as 4K video rolls into camera platforms, I think you'll see, from market standpoint, a lot more workflows in cameras where people are pulling stills out of a 4K stream instead of necessarily intentionally taking a 4K shot, basically. So they'll hit the button, it'll record a 4K stream, and they'll just pick the image they want. For professional video and professional stills, I think sporting events, anything that's being recorded, you'll see a transition to more of a platypus hybrid, information gatherer versus a photographer and a videographer that we still have to some degree today.
Actually, I want to pass that question over to Mark as well, actually. Mark, what are your thoughts about as 4K emerges on the horizon? What difference will that make?
Well, thanks, Barney, but it's not really so much on the horizon. It's actually already here. We've already begun shipping our first 4K consumer video camera. But as Jay mentions, the idea of being able to capture a continuous stream of what is essentially 8 megapixel still images, that's the resolution of 4K, at very high frame rates, 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second, which is currently being done. The lines, if you will, between still photography and video capture will tend to blur. And we do imagine that people will be taking still images out of 4K data streams. From a technological standpoint, however, it's a bit more difficult because the output rate of the imaging sensor, the throughput of the processor, even the writing of the data to the media becomes a bit more challenging because the 4K data stream is so much greater than that of a current full HD data stream. For instance, right now, full HD, 1920 by 1080, in AVC HD is about, I don't know, 25 megabits per second. In broadcast quality, XD cam, that can be 50 megabits per second. 4K, by comparison, 4K RAW, is typically about a gigabit of data per second. And even with sophisticated compression that is now being introduced, you're looking at data rates of about 150 to 600 megabits per second. So just handling the sheer amount of data of 4K video is a bit of a challenge itself from a hardware perspective, certainly from an editing perspective as well. But it's already here, and I think the point here is it's inevitable. I think the ability to have that kind of capture flexibility in both video and still is something that is going to be so attractive that it will drive the market forward. It'll also drive use applications. People will be looking at the blending of still and video probably a little bit more strongly than they are today. And then there's the whole infrastructure of 4K viewing in the home. I think that there's no doubt that the onset of 4K panels for television viewing in the home is coming very quickly. And the idea of the personal content capture to display on those panels is going to accelerate very quickly.
Interesting.
Cool. Well, I think we did have one question that's coming in from the internet about video before we change the subject matter. Yeah. So Susan, what do we have?
All right, the question is, in your opinion, has the dynamic range of DSLRs been compromised with the introduction of video capabilities in the newer DSLR cameras?
Ooh, should we hand that over to John? Or should we hand it over to Jay?
Jay. I think absolutely not. I think it's improved most of the platforms that are out there. I remember sitting on panels like this 10 years ago with experts like us, where people were sure video couldn't be rolled into DSLR platforms or what's now mirrorless platforms, just because the technical hurdles were insurmountable. One of the big solutions that was solved with rolling video into still camera platforms was tied to heat and dark current. As a lot of these platforms adopted video and captured continuously instead of infrequently, they generated a lot of heat, and that brought a requirement to find ways to address the noise generated from the dark current, generated from the heat, and all those improvements for dissipating heat, redesigning sensors, all that I think have gone to significantly enhance the dynamic range capable of the sensors that are used in all these platforms.
We've certainly seen a lot of feedback from our audience who are worried that the introduction of video somehow cripples or compromises the still capture, but we haven't really seen any indication of that. I mean, the stills have been getting better every year, so.
This leads on to an interesting point, onto one of our next topics, but if you're creating a camera now from scratch, you're making a mirrorless camera. How much easier does that make things compared to a traditional DSLR design, from the point of view of incorporating things like video?
That's a big question.
Yeah, sorry.
I think.
Do you have more freedom in a mirrorless design?
Certainly, from a mechanical standpoint, yes. With the significant improvements in addition of phase detect on sensor with contrast, you've got autofocus systems now that can function very competitively and seamlessly on the sensor themselves. You don't have to have a phase detect autofocus system like in a DSLR to get great autofocus performance. So that wasn't possible 2 or 3 years ago. So there's significant advantages in a mirrorless platform today versus a DSLR platform. If I was designing from scratch today, I'd definitely design mirrorless. If I was designing 5 years ago and I had the technology I had today, I'd invest in mirrorless as well.
So John, Pentax now Ricoh does have one mirrorless camera, the K01. Mm-hmm. What is your perspective there? I mean, there's, you're in the market, but just one toe in.
Yeah, and that was probably the first execution where the video was really incorporated into the camera, right. And it just happened to be a mirrorless because it had the things like the autofocus capabilities and the higher frame rate and everything. So I think there's some advantages, and I think that is thankfully bled into our DSLRs as well. So the technology goes back and forth.
I think one of the things that differentiates mirrorless in theory is that there are fewer constraints on the physical design of the product. I mean, you don't have, most of these are based on film cameras originally, and you have to have films and motors and all those things. It's kind of interesting that all of them are recognizably cameras, though. I mean, there's not been much of an attempt to change the form factor at all. Do you have any idea why even these mirrorless cameras with prisms and stuff still look so much like cameras? Is that just a consumer-led thing?
I think there's a form that works.
That works. Right. Yeah, it's accepted. People recognize it for what it is, and I think there's a comfort level with that, especially for more experienced photographers. I mean, you see wild concepts that pop up on the internet every once in a while, and while they're cool, they're not as well accepted as something that has that kind of traditional look.
And most of the pictures taken today are taken on a mobile device, whatever it is. And as people are buying a camera, they're buying a camera, even when they have this, to get better performance, better quality, better images than they can get off their mobile device. Otherwise, they'd use their mobile device. And part of that is the look, the feel. In some cases, the requirement of customers to have a viewfinder they can use in bright light, capability to reach out with a big lens, all of those camera things, addition of a flash, all those traditional things that developed over 100 years, basically, of cameras.
But before this bringing together of video and stills, when you had dedicated video cameras, they didn't look like cameras, right? They were, generally speaking, a thing you held in your palm with a... Sure. So do you find that that customers have any requirement anymore for a camera that looks and feels like a video camera. I mean, I never really understood why they were so different. Why you hold them like that for a video camera.
Honestly, it was a function of long zoom, how to pack that much zoom into a small space. And you see with bridge cameras, designs that aren't necessarily that dissimilar because they're trying to pack that zoom.
The zoom on the side of the lens and all that.
Yeah.
So I guess actually I want to hand that question over to Mark as well. I mean, in the days of mirrorless and miniaturization and big sensors in small cameras with no prisms, why do cameras still look like cameras?
Well, I think it has to do with customer expectation and manufacturers' interest in building products that meet those expectations. But that said, I think that there are many examples of camera form factor that breaks that mold away from tradition. It could be as extreme as, say, what we've done with the lens style camera, the QX series, but then it goes in the other direction to traditional applications as well. I think the success that different camera form factors have enjoyed reflects the different tastes that customers have. There are those that are shooting, as Jay mentions, with cell phones all the time and wouldn't pick up a camera at all simply because they enjoy the workflow and the user experience of using a smartphone. For those customers, the idea of a lens-style camera works very well for them. There are others for whom the style of photography that they have requires the form factor that's evolved over the years that provides them, a very substantial grip and an eye-level viewfinder for framing and stability. So again, it's the variety of customer taste that I think is driving what the market is delivering in overall form factor. But back to the question that you had about mirrorless cameras and how well or suited they are relative to, say, moving mirror cameras, what most miss is that even conventional SLRs, when they attempt to shoot video, become mirrorless cameras by definition. And therefore, all of the development that went into mirrorless cameras over 2009 and 2010, it essentially becomes necessary and a supporter of video capture because right now, a conventional optical viewfinder through the lens camera is not really capturing video. It becomes a mirrorless camera with the sensor providing not only capture but also preview when capturing video. And all of the technology that went into the development of mirrorless cameras is what's pushing video capture forward. But when you look at the form factors and try to figure out why is it that 50, 60, 70 years later after the conventional SLR look became popularized, it's because it's very functional. And a lot of camera designs take advantage of that, and consumers are very comfortable with it.
Interesting, thank you. So I have one more question actually for Mark, which is, I'll offer to the group after your response, but one thing Sony's been doing a lot over the past couple of years is putting increasingly large sensors in very small cameras. So I'm interested in learning what you think the limits are there. I mean, where does that end? How much smaller can you make cameras without, without just having the sensors sitting outside of the body?
Yeah, it's sort of like the question, how many megapixels or how many stops of dynamic range you can have. I think that everyone was quite surprised with the size of a full-frame camera being as small as it was when the RX-1 was introduced. It was almost difficult to believe that that would fit into the camera. I don't know that there are practical limitations so much for packaging and fitting a larger sensor, but I don't know that anyone is expecting a medium format sensor in a palm-sized camera anytime soon. But I would say that a lot of it is dictated by the sensor material science development. Realistically, it used to be that the larger pixels and the larger pixel counts dictated larger and larger sensors. And I would say that as sensor technology changes, what we're finding is that even sensors with 4 or 5 micron sized pixels can deliver extraordinary results. So growing the sensor larger and larger to realize higher and higher pixel counts and larger and larger pixels themselves may not really pay off in the advantages that it once did when it comes to still photography. And I think anyone who is familiar with professional level video cameras realizes that higher and higher pixel counts for video capture is actually often a demerit. So I would say that the size of the image sensor size that we're seeing today, much will have to happen if it's going to get much larger than that in a very mainstream sense. I would say that there are going to be plenty of opportunities for very large sensor cameras, but if you look at the development and look at the way the industry has trended, full frame 24 by 36 millimeters seems to be the sweet spot in terms of development and performance. So to change that a lot, I would say much will have to happen.
Thanks, Mark. We've got to wrap up this section pretty quickly, but I want to turn a question over to John. I'm not going to ask you when Pentax Ricoh is going to make a full-frame DSLR, because I know what you're going to say, which is that you won't answer it. But yeah. Pentax for a very long time has been known for smaller than usual SLRs,
yes.
Smaller than usual DSLRs. The
yeah.
Pentax Q, the smallest interchangeable lens camera out there. I mean, miniaturization is obviously hugely important for Pentax. What does your audience ask you for?
I think there's a compromise or a good combination, because you got to consider things like there's got to be an LCD panel. People have to be able to view their images, and they've got to be able to view it at a certain size. So, while cameras could certainly get smaller, the Q is as small as it is because we said, okay, this is the size LCD we're going to put in it. If we put anything bigger, it's going to be a bigger camera. So it's kind of a compromise. A camera like the GR, they could probably make it smaller with newer lens technology, but there's other factors that kind of go into it: the size of the screen, the size of the battery, where the control layout is. So we're constantly looking at that, and we constantly try to make as compact but as usable a product as possible.
All right.
I think, excuse me, it'd be good for us just to quickly touch on this every single camera that you guys talked about earlier, that, well, not everyone, but virtually all of the ones that you raved about was a mirrorless camera. And I'd be really interested to hear what you guys think about why mirrorless cameras are not selling. When we love them, and they always get great reviews, and they seem to offer a perfectly good alternative to an SLR, but they're, what, 5% of the market, something like that?
They're not selling particularly in the US, they do better in other territories.
But I think globally they represent like maybe 20% of the interchangeable lens market, 5% of the entire market. They're actually falling quicker than SLRs. So they're not capturing the public's imagination, and I'd be really interested if you had any idea why that was.
I think it's a perception issue, because I think people don't see it necessarily as a DSLR versus a mirrorless. They see it as a camera where you can change the lenses. So whether it has a pentaprism, whether it doesn't, whether it has a viewfinder or not, kind of comes to where that camera lies in the price point and the feature sets. So they may see one camera that is a mirrorless, is nice and compact at a certain price point, right. And then they see something else that has a viewfinder and a pentaprism and all these things, and I think there's a perception that that's a better value.
You get more
so I think it's almost more of a value thing, and how people see the cameras and where they fit within the lineup.
I think a lot of it is customers, particularly in the US, have been aspiring to get a DSLR if they haven't had one before. Yes. So they're still aspiring up to the bigger is better camera. The reality is the technology is moving faster obviously in mirrorless cameras, and cycling quicker than it is in let's say some of the legacy platforms. So many of the mirrorless cameras here outperform DSLRs in their price range, and DSLRs above their price range. In terms of autofocus, obviously frames per second, video performance, all of that. But I don't think a big chunk of the market understands that yet. They're still aspiring to what they were aspiring to a couple of years ago.
Right.
Go ahead.
Sorry, but until recently there was some price premium, right? If you walked into a store, a mirrorless equivalent would be slightly more expensive. That's fair to say, right?
And I think that's fair to say, slightly more expensive without, in most cases, a performance benefit.
Right.
But now you've got, in mirrorless, in a lot of cases, a performance benefit and a value, depending on the platform, a significant value benefit, including new technologies like wireless, which is tremendously new, to a lot of these platforms, but simple things that are improvements that aren't in a lot of the DSLRs, like touchscreens. Things like tap to focus, which is, since these things in our hands are all day, we're used to, but if you show someone tap to focus on a mirrorless camera and they can pick their kid out of a lineup and get the picture focused and shot, that's just amazing to people who've been using DSLRs that don't have those kind of capabilities. That
was the first thing that I think we were really convinced by when touchscreens started turning up in cameras. You know, it was the first thing you could do, which you really couldn't do before, was tap to focus. And
it's not really hard to tap on that.
Well, especially earlier we were talking about tap to focus for video as well,
pulling,
and the focus pull, and that blew me away.
It's huge use for kids too. You got a load of kids running around, and you can tap, focus, and shoot all in one. Yeah,
that's incredible. Great. I think from my perspective, from being here on Creative Live and hearing, being from the consumer standpoint, is the education. Is that talking to my family over the holiday weekend about what new camera my brother-in-law wants to buy, and I was, well, have you heard of these mirrorless cameras? And he's saying, what are you talking about? I don't know what you're talking about. So
the only thing I would say there is that the tap to focus is enormously useful, but it's not uniquely mirrorless technology now. It is coming out in DSLRs as well, as better and better touchscreens get built in, so it's something that you can enjoy regardless.
But going back to the why isn't mirrorless kind of taking off as much, it's...
Maybe some of its advantages are being adopted in DSLRs as well, but yeah.
Well, I think that we need to move on to our next topic.
Yes, we should say goodbye to Mark. So thank you so much, Mark. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Mark.
Bye, Mark.
Thank you,
all the way from
Mark.
San Diego. Thank you very much.